Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the most eerie and unexplained experience you have ever had? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Once, when I was 14 years old, I was sick with norovirus and curled up in the restroom. I was all alone that day, out of school, and my mom was at work. She knew I was sick and was good friends with our doctor, and he could always write us a note and give us prescriptions without even coming in, as long as it wasn't for narcotics. So I'm sitting there, waiting for my mother to bring back some antibiotics on her lunch break. The old firing from both cylinders ordeal. I'll spare the details. Anyways, I'm in agony when suddenly I hear a very deep voice tell me to get up and get out of the restroom. I immediately felt better and got out, because scary voice and adrenaline, yo. As soon as I get out of the restroom, a bullet comes flying through the window and hits the bottom of our toilet, right where my head would have been. Thank you, evil, good, demonic Morgan Freeman voice. I like to think it was an audible hallucination, because I was so out of it, and it was an awesome coincidence. Still makes me wonder, though. My great-grandfather lived in that house, and my father described him as a 7-foot mountain of a man with the voice of Satan. Maybe I should thank great-granddad. Who knows? I worked at a bakery once and had to start very early before dawn. One morning I was working alone and felt someone behind me. My senses were tingling, and I knew it was someone but not a person. I was wondering if I should turn around, but my rational side was telling me not to. I turned around and could feel that someone was walking in front of me, and where it laid its footsteps. There was a blender on the counter in front of where it walked to, and it turned on. I stood there for like 30 seconds as my body was in shock, before walking over and calmly turning it off. I remember having tunnel vision, like shooting a free throw, as I witnessed the presence walking in front of me. Funny thing is, it was there, but didn't have an opaque form I could describe. My father, when I was a baby, claimed that nearly every night late into the morning, he saw a ghost while we lived in my grandma's grand house. This was during the 80s. We lived there for a year. After months of this, the topic came up in front of my grandma. She asked about what he saw. She couldn't believe the description my dad gave her and thought he was lying. She pulled out a photo album, and my dad went through it and found my grandma's sister as a young adult who died young. He knew her name, the age she died, where she was born, and a lot of other things he claimed she told him throughout her visit with him. My grandma was blown away and began crying because she never told him about her. And there's no way he could have known about her besides her sister telling my father herself. My grandmother would tell the story all the time when we were older and would visit her. My father said after we moved out, he never saw her again. When I was 6, my sister, brother, and I visited some relatives in Arizona. They were remodeling and replaced a crystal chandelier. We got one of the pendants and spent hours playing with it until it somehow got lost. We looked all over the house but couldn't find it anywhere. I was looking in one of the bedrooms, got frustrated, and sat on the bed. There was a closet directly across from the bed, and as I was sitting there, I realized that the pendant was floating in the middle of the closet. It started floating around in figure eights and then dropped. I got up to look in the closet and found it there on the floor. I still have no idea what the hell happened. When I was 6, my grandparents took me to this Christian youth revival type event. There were skits about resisting the devil, sing-alongs for Jesus, gymnastics exhibitions for Jesus, guys in karate gear breaking boards for Jesus, things like that. In between the acts, the presenters would give small speeches about how important God is and how the devil's agents were among us waiting to harm us. One thing stuck with me because it was really grim. He told of how Satanists were kidnapping people and eating them. Police just across the border had found a hell house, and in that house was a witch's cauldron filled with human body parts coming from a young man who had been taken right off the streets. The boy had been kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. then made into a stew that the Satanists ate to give them magic powers. The presenter told us kids. This was the summer of 1988. Years later, curious, I looked up the incident. A student named Mark Kilroy had in fact been kidnapped, tortured, murdered, and put in a cauldron by a cult leader and his followers in order to give them immunity from the police and other cartels. All the details fit, except that this happened in the March of '89, the year after the youth revival. How did the presenters know about the murder? Were they talking about another murder? Or did I end up in a Christian-themed time slip? I asked my grandmother about it. She said she had no idea what I was talking about and denied ever taking me to a youth revival. All these years, I've never been able to explain it. Okay, so this isn't scary or anything, but it's the biggest unexplained mystery of my childhood, and I'd like an explanation. I was around 10, I think I was 9, but honestly don't remember, and I was hanging out with my best friend at his house. We were in his parents' computer room, and out of nowhere a page starts printing. We look at it, and it's covered in these weird symbols. I would later learn that it was Wingding's font, but at the time we were fully convinced that it was an alien message. This was pre-Wi-Fi, so it would have had to be printed from the computer in that room, and neither of us touched it. I know it's possible that my friend was pranking me, but he never admitted it, and we lost touch a few years later. In the summer of 2012, my daughter was 2 years old. I lost 2 great uncles that summer, both unexpectedly for different reasons. On both occasions, my daughter specifically acted startled and looked into a corner of her room where nobody was and commented that there was a man in the room. On both occasions, she did this before we ever got a phone call, but after the uncle's passing. I was with her for one of these incidents, and my mom was with her for the other. I like to think that my great-uncles were stopping in to check on us, but who the hell knows? It's an unexplained mystery until we know for sure. I used to be on a search and rescue patrol. We got a very strange call one night. A loud car crash in the middle of a rural area was reported by a nearby resident, but when emergency workers showed up, the victims were nowhere to be found. So we showed up to the scene, and at the end of a very long dirt road, there was a 90-degree turn with an embankment. The car was clearly going at a very high speed, missed the 90-degree turn, hit the embankment, flew through the air, and the front of the car hit the ground so hard it gouged out a pretty sizable hole upon impact. The windshield showed 2 shattered impact zones where the passengers' heads hit, covered in blood and hair. There was more blood in and around the car. The scene was gruesome and didn't look like a survivable crash, especially given the mangled condition of the car. We expected to find bodies nearby. Police dogs, firefighters, and now an entire search and rescue party were not able to locate the victims after several hours. As night set in, it began to get more and more eerie. There was this horrible-looking car crash, but no bodies to be found. Finally, after about 3 hours of searching, there was a 911 call that came in, a report of a bloody dead body found in the bed of a parked pickup truck in a rural home's driveway a couple of miles away. Apparently, a family was coming home from a vacation, and when they pulled into their driveway, they noticed the body and immediately called 911. So 2 police units dispatched from the search to respond to the call. We all assumed this would be the end of the story. Well, the police showed up to the house, and to everyone's surprise, no body to be found. Somehow, the body had vanished. There was blood, but no sign of anything else. So a second search radius started from that house. We searched practically the whole night. We were called back the next morning, and nobody ever found the bodies. We eventually called the search off. To this day, I have no idea what happened. I mean, that's incredibly weird. And that the bodies were never found? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the accident happened before people thought it did, but then the body in the truck. I don't know. What do you guys think? I was about 9 or 10. One night I woke up because I was hella thirsty. Went to the kitchen, had my water, and came back to the bedroom. Thing is, as soon as I walked in, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I was feeling unwelcome in my own goddamn bedroom, so I just ran to the bed and did the old monsters can't see me if the blanket is over me. I waited like that for a few minutes, and suddenly, I shit you not, I felt something or somebody pushing down on my head 2 times. I got out of bed as fast as I could, the blanket still over my head because I was afraid to look. Slept in my sister's bedroom that night. To this day, I still don't know if it was actually real or I imagined it, but I still get the creeps when thinking about it. When I was a kid, my parents watched the same local news station on TV every single morning, so I got to know the sound of the reporters' voices after some time. But a lot of times, especially on the weekends, I'd hear the news on, so I'd go downstairs to the living room to see who's up. But the TV wouldn't be on, and no one would be awake. The only noise would be the sound of the water in the fish tank in the dining area. I've fallen for it countless times, because it sounded like their exact voices. I know this isn't the most exciting story, but it was really creepy, and I'm not exactly sure what was causing the sound. On top of that, my older sister heard the voices too, so it wasn't just my imagination running wild. If it was her trying to prank me, then she probably would have admitted it by now, since it's been several years. But we both still swear by our story. We've lived in other houses before, and we've moved houses since then, and we've never had a problem like that. Cold weather survival training. 3 days in the mountains with the occasional below zero temps, 12 students each 5 miles apart. We were given a kind of flare gun in case you hit an oh shit I'm gonna die moment, and you were supposed to head to if you saw one go off. Anyway, I'm in my shelter freezing my ass off and I see a flare go off. My heart sank and I grabbed my gear and rushed there. As I'm getting closer, I see 3 more go off at different sites. Now I'm kind of panicking. 1 is bad, 4 is a shit show. I get within 100 feet of the first site and see the other student's shelter. I warn him I'm approaching and walk up to find him fine, fire going at everything. I ask him if he fired a flare or saw the others. He said nothing and showed me his flares. None had been fired. I check him out, he looks fine, still doesn't say anything, which is weird as fuck. Thought he might be in shock, so I stayed a while, until he pointed to the door. I take this as my cue, and I just say I'm going to leave if he's all set, and he nods. I walk back toward my site and get an eerie feeling. The whole way, hairs are standing up. I start getting back into my shelter, and there's someone in there. I tweak a little and think it must be another student until he looks up and just stares expressionless. It took me a second to realize it was me, like looking in a mirror. I've never had a more terrible, scared I should not be here feeling in my life. I bolted out of the shelter, tripped and fell. Next thing I know, I'm walking up in my shelter to a cadre member asking if I'm okay, and if I'm ready to hike out. Think everything that happened was a dream. I get up and get my stuff together. As we were walking to meet up with the others, he asked me why I didn't respond to the flares last night. Terrifying. I had a cousin who was pretty normal and happy the first 8 years of her life. One day out of the blue, she started getting really upset if she was ever outside near the woods. Day or night, it didn't matter. Eventually, my aunt got her to tell her why. Apparently, whenever she'd be near the woods or open area, she'd see a huge black wolf glaring at her, baring its teeth. Eventually, she said it started coming in her dreams and telling her it was going to kill her family. These were pretty dark things coming from a young kid's mouth. Then she started saying she'd see kids come open her door at night and stare at her. They'd shut the door and leave her in the pitch black until she'd pass out from fear. She said she saw the wolf's eyes glaring at her from the closet. Now, I've stayed at my cousin's house because I and her older brother were always hanging out. In her older brother's room, there were tiny, child-sized handprints on the ceiling above the bed. We assumed it was from my little cousin jumping on the bed and touching the ceiling, even though she wouldn't possibly be able to get that high. We tried painting over them, but they'd show through every time. Super creepy. I never felt safe sleeping there anymore. Eventually, my aunt got the church involved with my little cousin because she started saying the wolf was everywhere. At family gatherings, in the woods at my grandparents' house, up north at the cabins for a family vacation. The pastor came to their home and blessed the house to cleanse it of anything evil. Then one day it all just stopped. My cousin is in high school now and still scares the piss out of my adult self retelling these stories with new details I never knew. Crazy experience overall, but I'm glad she's better now and nothing ever followed me home. My life was changed completely at the very start of 2016 by an unexplained mystery. I was accused of sending some extremely rude messages to one of my best friends. Big knock in my self-confidence, and I feel like over 2 years later, I'm still not over it. I wish I could stop thinking about where they came from and just move on with my life, but I can't help having these dreams about magically finding out who did it and why they framed me, and everything will be okay again. I feel like I'm split in half right now. One half of me is continuing with life, pretending that it doesn't bother me anymore, while the other half is stuck, paused in time on January 1st, 2016, wishing with every last drop of hope I've left that I can go back to then and continue my friendships from where we left off. This will get buried and nobody will care. We do. Whoever framed me will almost certainly take it to their grave now since it's been so long. An old friend of mine used to live in an old house that a couple of family members of mine died in. It was old age for both uncle and an aunt, and more have died in the surrounding properties. This old house, though, has the worst feeling at night, like the kind of darkness that pushes you to bed early because you lose sense of where the walls are. A couple odd things happened there as well. My friend and I went out on his porch one night to smoke a cigarette, and as I crossed the front door's threshold, the cigarette just dematerialized out of my hand. Thinking I dropped it, we sort of frantically searched for it as smokers do for lost cigarettes. Plus, they had kids and small dogs, so I felt obligated to find it. I ran my fingers along the edge of the door frame. I dug my fingers into every vacant space I could find. We never found it. Not paranormal, but I searched my ass off for that thing, so I'd like to think a distant relative was trying to get me to quit from beyond the grave. A time came when my friend and family moved to be closer with their family, and the house sat empty for a long time because my family couldn't afford to buy it again, especially when its age is factored in. I was a teenager, and naturally I felt exploratory. So I lurked around in it one night, checking for ways in. A combination of teenage entitlement and my family's ties to the building made me feel like it wasn't even breaking in. The thing was, one of the sliding glass doors was left unlocked. Inside, I was a little angry to see how messy they left it. I honestly looked like toddlers just left random objects scattered across every floor. They even left behind a small couch. I wish I had taken in hindsight. So I made a little sitting area upstairs with the couch and a couple of plastic tables that the kids used to eat on. I got high up there a few nights and let myself unwind. It was fun to pretend that I had a whole house just to myself. I always made sure to shut the lights out so I wouldn't be caught though. But somebody or something kept turning the lights on between my visits, and I distinctly remember my family was worried about squatters. It wouldn't be impossible, but this is the kind of rural area where a squatter might be a little more feral, for lack of a better word. Homeless people have been known to seek out trailers and sheds in this area. I find that idea more scary than a distant relative's ghost, to be honest.